Hi, and thank you for joining us for another Monday Moment in Matthew. I'm Caleb Ray with the Rock Church of Christ, and we're so glad that you joined us again this week as we continue our look through the Gospel of Matthew. This week, we're looking at what we call the time period of Jesus' life known as the preparation. This is the end of this period of his life as his ministry is now beginning. Last week, we looked at Jesus' temptation in the wilderness and how he was tempted like Israel, but yet was without sin. This week, we're noticing the call of the first disciples and the impact that Jesus has on individuals as the Messiah. And so I'll invite you to read along with us in Matthew 4, verses 12 through 25. And when he heard that John had been arrested, he withdrew into Galilee. And leaving Nazareth, he went and lived in Capernaum by the sea, in the territory of Zebulun and Naphtali, so that what was spoken by the prophet Isaiah might be fulfilled. The land of Zebulun and the land of Naphtali, the way of the sea, beyond the Jordan, Galilee of the Gentiles. The people dwelling in darkness have seen a great light, and for those dwelling in the region and shadow of death, on them a light has dawned. From that time Jesus began to preach, saying, Repent! For the kingdom of heaven is at hand. While walking by the Sea of Galilee, he saw two brothers, Simon, who is called Peter, and Andrew his brother, casting a net into the sea, for they were fishermen. And he said to them, Follow me, and I will make you fishers of men. Immediately they left their nets and followed him. And going on from there, he saw two other brothers, James the son of Zebedee, and John his brother, in the boat with Zebedee their father, mending their nets. And he called them. Immediately they left the boat and their father and followed him. And he went throughout all Galilee, teaching in their synagogues and proclaiming the gospel of the kingdom, and healing every disease and every affliction among the people. So his fame spread throughout all Syria, and they brought him all the sick, those afflicted with various diseases and pains, those oppressed by demons, those having seizures and paralytics, and he healed them. And great crowds followed him from Galilee and the Decapolis, and from Jerusalem and Judea, and from beyond the Jordan. Now this text is surely packed, and we can talk about several different items here. But let's just try to hit the highlights so we don't get too bogged down in some of this. In Matthew chapter 4, you have Matthew quoting Isaiah 9 verses 1 and 2, in which he's applying it to the life of Jesus, saying that the ministry of the Messiah was going to start in a specific place, and that would be the land of Zebulun and Naphtali. Well, we can know from history where this is based upon the description that's used in Isaiah, the descriptions that's used here, and the understanding of where their territory was from the Old Testament. And so here's one of the key focal points to me of proving that Jesus is the Messiah. It's one thing to say that Jesus worked miracles, that Jesus did all these great, wonderful works. But if you're talking about a light dawning from a specific place, and you have an individual who is doing all of this other that you're trying to discount by calling it supernatural means, or you're trying to discount and say that they're not true fulfillment of prophecy, that he's just a man, that he's not God incarnate, etc. If you can see that the ministry and the light is starting from the very place it was been foretold, that should solidify in your mind that this is the individual with whom we've been waiting. His ministry is starting from the right spot, it's doing the right work, and it has the right effects. And here's some key notes I want you to pull out of Isaiah 9 here in Matthew 4. He talks about that this place is Galilee of the Gentiles. Matthew is pointing here in Matthew 4 that there are Gentiles that are going to receive blessings from this light. And then he says that these people have walked in darkness. They're shrouded around. They're in obscurity. That's what the word here actually means. They are unable to see what is right before them. They are unable to know who God is, what blessings he is for them. And they're in darkness. And in the darkness, there is much suffering. There is much pain. There is much confusion. There is such uncertainty. And Jesus is the light that can bring them out of that darkness. We're going to see light portrayed throughout the Gospel of Matthew. You know, normally those of us who preach, when we're wanting to talk about light from a biblical perspective, we're going to the writings of John. We're typically not going to go to Matthew, except for maybe to mention Matthew 5, verses 13 through 16, salt of the earth and light of the world. But from Matthew 4, Matthew is making a point that Christ is a light that is dawning upon people who are dwelling in darkness. Friends, there are people who are still dwelling in darkness today. There are still people that are suffering because of what's going on around them. And Christ is the light that can pull them out of that darkness and be the benefit they need. Then Matthew kind of takes a brief moment to talk about the 4 first disciples being called: Peter, Andrew, James, and John. And it's interesting to note just a little bit about their calling. Jesus comes to them and they're fishing in the night. That's what they do. They're fishermen. And he uses a play on words. He says, "Follow me and I will make you fishers of men." One of my favorite things to do when I'm looking at the gospel message is I love to see how Jesus uses everyday normal life to show us biblical principles that teach us about God and about his will. And if we will sometimes just look around us, the evidence for God is all around. In the trees, in the rivers, in nature, in the way of life. We see God everywhere. And Christ is using that to be impactful to them. And here's another thing. We know from some of the other gospel messages, Christ is not a fisherman. He's the son of a carpenter. But yet he instructs them on how to fish on one occasion. And so it's interesting to note that Christ is using what is available, using what they know to be impactful to them and to bring them to him. And here's the big part for me from verses 18 through 21 or 22, when these 4 men are being called the 2 sets of brothers. In both occasions, when Jesus calls them, Matthew makes a point of recording that immediately they followed. Matthew spells that out for us in his gospel, that there is some urgency to following after Jesus. You know, if I'm someone who's in darkness and the light is right there, there is urgency that I move towards the light, that I no longer be in the shroud of darkness, that I no longer be clouded away from what I cannot see. If I'm out in the middle of the woods, in the middle of the night, when there is no light around and light starts peeking through the branches, I'm going towards that light, friends. I'm getting out of darkness and to where I believe safety is. And so there is a sense of urgency in following after Jesus the Messiah. But probably my favorite verses in the Gospel of Matthew are verses 23 through 25 of chapter 4. And let me tell you why. In Matthew 4, 23 through 25, you have all these different types of people that are coming to see Jesus. You have the sick, the oppressed, those who are taking care of such individuals, those who are curious, those who are seeking assistance, those who are at the bottom of their life. And Jesus is there and he is ministering to them. Jesus is there in verse 24 and he is healing them. He is helping them. He is doing for them. Here's why I love this passage so much. If I'm looking at verses 12 through 17 and I am seeing that Jesus is a light, here is the effect of light. Verses 23, 24, and 25. The effect of light is that people move towards the light. Christ, because of the reputation he is gaining, because of the ability he has, and the spirit that he has as a caring, compassionate Lord, these people are following after him, and they're coming from all around. They're coming from Galilee, the Decapolis, Jerusalem, Judea, from beyond the Jordan. We're going to get to chapter 8 in Matthew, and he's going to enter a town, and a Roman centurion knows who he is. How does a Roman know who he is unless his fame is spreading? Jesus becomes this great drawing factor, and it says that on them a light has dawned Friends, if you've been in the darkness, if you've been hidden, if you have been in a place where you are uncertain, you are scared, you are worried, and you have someone take that away from you, you should always be about telling others and showing them how someone can do that for them as well. Because the reality is all people suffer. All people have issues in their life. They look different, they seem different, some are willing to talk about them, some are not. But everybody has a time in their life in which they need to be brought out of the darkness. And here in Matthew 4, we see the impact light has on people. Sometimes I'm afraid we are shared to show the light. Jesus is going to talk about that in Matthew 5, where we're going to get to in just a couple weeks. Jesus is for people their salvation, their hope, their help, their comfort. And because of who he is and his nature, people are coming around. We would do well to imitate Christ, and we would do well to show others this great light that is dawning on those in darkness. I know I was in darkness for a time, and I am grateful that the Lord showed his light to me through his followers. That's how I came to know truly who God was. Can I be that for someone else? And can you be that for someone else? My friends, this week, consider who the true light is and ask yourself, do I know someone who's in darkness that I can help see the light that is dawning? Next week, we're going to look at Matthew 5, verses 1 through 12, as we look at the beginning of the Sermon on the Mount. I hope you'll come back and join us next week, and I hope you have a blessed rest of your week. Thank you for joining us.